In this lesson, we'll talk about the concept of on-target or in-context presentation and how Mudbox makes this work. On-target presentation really stems from an issue that arises whenever we work on models and textures in 3D. And normally our work environment, as far as lighting and camera settings go, will be different than the final environment that the model is meant for, whether that's a video game engine or rendered frames. For instance, our T-Rex may be headed for a volcanic island with a lot of red lighting. Now, if we paint textures on the model with this white default light, the texture may look different when he makes it into the final scene. So what these on-target features attempt to do is to match up our work environment as closely as possible with the final environment. A number of on-target related aspects of Mudbox, like materials and texture maps, are included among the other lessons in this course. Here, let's focus a little bit more on lighting and using the viewport filters. So if we take a look at our object list, you can see we currently have a single light. We get a little bit more information about this light. We can see that the intensity of the light is 1, and it's a directional light. If we go ahead and look down here in the properties, you can see that we get a little bit more information and the ability to change some of these properties. So we have the diffuse color, which is the color of the light, so we can change that to a red, take it down closer to white. You can see how that affects the model. Okay, we'll go ahead and leave that at white for now. We can also change the intensity of the light. Pretty straightforward. We can also change the scale. It doesn't make much sense until we turn on show light, and there you can see an indication, an icon of that light, and we can scale that up or down. Okay, if we want to move the light around, okay, right now you can see that as we move around, the light stays oriented with our camera so that at all times the model is illuminated sort of in the same way. If we go ahead and uncheck locked to camera and move around, you can see that now the light is no longer locked to our camera, so that as we move around, it's dark on this side because we don't have any light. If we move back kind of over to the other side, turn that back on, you can see that that's now back with the camera. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, to kind of move this light around, we can go ahead and either turn on the manipulator and just manually kind of rotate that around. We can also hold down L to move that light around and just kind of rotate around here. To do this, we don't really need to see the manipulator or the light. All we need to do is have the light selected, and we can move that around. Okay. We also have the ability to turn on or off shadows. So we can turn those shadows on, and that will give us, you can see the shadowing there. If you want to move that light around, you can see how those shadows are kind of moving across the body. Okay, we'll turn those off for now. So we have a single light here. Let's say that we want to bring in multiple lights maybe that have been saved out. So we've got a light setup. So we'll take a look at lighting presets down here in our lighting presets tray. There are a lot of different options that we're able to use. So let's go ahead and choose one of these. And you can see if I hover over these, I get a little kind of preview of what that'll look like, a little bit larger view. So we can go ahead and let's choose this backlit. By choosing this, it's saying that it's going to remove the existing lights. We'll say yes and remove those. And that'll load in that lighting preset. So it'll bring those new lights in, drop them at the bottom of the object list, and then if we want to modify those from here, we certainly can. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at those lights. So now we've got it brought in a directional light, which we can modify the intensity of that. Maybe bring that down a little bit. And then it brought in an image-based light. And an image-based light is a really powerful aspect of lighting here in Mudbox, and that's going to allow us to bring in our HDR images to use as lighting. Okay. So once we tweak our lights that we have here, we can save that back out as lighting preset if we wanted to, or we can start to add lights manually. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this light, and let's start to set up some lighting here on our model. So we've got our directional light. We'll go ahead and stick with that. I'm just going to rotate this around, and let me make sure that I set that intensity to 1. Okay. And then we can kind of use the L key to rotate this around. And I want to just move this so that it is kind of shining from the top down. So maybe something like that. And we can dial the intensity up a little bit. We get something like that. So kind of a key coming down from the top. Let's bring in an image-based light to kind of fill this out. So we'll go up to Create Lights, Image-Based Light. And what this will do is bring in a light that's going to use an HDR image as a lighting source. And so what we can do is actually use an HDR image from whatever our final environment's going to be, whether it's an image created from our final 3D environment or captured from a live action set, and bring that in as our light. So we'll go ahead and our image-based light. You can see that right now the light file it's using is this 3-point default. We can go ahead and use some of the ones that come with Mudbox here. We can go ahead and let's bring in, I don't know, the morning beach. Go ahead and open that up. And you can see how that lighting affects this. We can also move this around. So in the same way, we can kind of rotate this around, just holding down L. You can see the effect on our model. Now, if this T-Rex was reflective, we could also see the reflection there as well for this. Now, for this particular case, let's say that I want to kind of use this as to kind of fill up the areas, but I don't want it to be completely have an intensity of 1. So I'll go ahead and just kind of dial that down a bit. So maybe 0.3 or 4, maybe. And then we'll want to maybe bring in another light. So I'll go ahead and bring in another directional light. Okay, we'll go ahead and grab that directional light. And let's say I just want to kind of fill up some of these areas, but I want to take that intensity down as well. So maybe we get something along those lines. And so maybe this light, I want to unlock it from the camera. Okay, and so we get a little bit different lighting on either side, and we can tweak that up. You can see that the light on top is maybe a little bit too intense. We can go ahead and bring that down a little bit. All right, so what we can do is really set up our lights to mimic the lighting that we're going to have in our final scene. So it makes it a little bit easier when we're painting textures and modeling, so we know how that's actually going to react a little bit better with the light that we're going to be actually using with it. Okay. And once you get the lighting that you want, you can save all of that out as a lighting preset. Now, another thing that I want to touch on as far as on target is going to be the viewport filters. And so if we go over to the viewport filters, the first one we'll look at is the ambient occlusion. And ambient occlusion is just kind of a fake as far as global illumination with all the shadows inside these sort of occluded parts of the model. So kind of the inside of the mouth, and you see kind of the dark spaces between the scales where lights have been occluded. And so we can get a little bit better idea of the detail that we have by using this. So I'll go ahead and check that on. So here you can see all of that darkness between the scales becomes a little bit more apparent, and then kind of around the eyes and up around the head you can see that darkness in there as well. We can also change the strength of the occlusion. I'm going to go ahead and set that down to maybe 1. So it lightens it up a little bit. So it gives us a little bit better idea of some of the detail we have in there. We can work with that on if we like, our viewport filters. Let's go ahead and look at another filter, the depth of field. So we'll go ahead and turn this off. And then let's go ahead and turn on depth of field. So you can see everything gets kind of blurry. Let's go ahead and frame this up a little bit better. So I'm going to kind of move in here and get this guy kind of close up here a little bit more. And so what we can do is actually set a focus on this. So we'll go to the depth of field, and we can set a focus distance. You can see it's kind of in focus right up there. Let's go ahead and increase that a little bit. Maybe make that 250. So this is going to be the center of the focus, and then this is going to be a sort of field around that that's in focus, and everything else will be blurred by a particular amount. So we can go ahead and maybe set that down. Let's go ahead and decrease this depth of field here to maybe 100 or so. So you can see we're getting a lot of this area in here in focus, and then it's being blurred out as it goes back. So this will also help us figure out as far as what detail needs to be modeled if it's from a particular view, and we know that the camera is going to have depth of field on it, so that we're not worried about seeing everything in complete focus. So it just gives us a little bit better idea of how the model is going to be used and how it's going to look. Okay, we can go ahead and turn that off if we want to. So we can work with those on, depending on your graphics card capabilities. Will depend on how fast that'll move around for you, but that's definitely a good option to use as far as the depth of field, the ambient occlusion, to bring out a lot of those details. And you've got a lot of other viewport filters in here that you can experiment with as well. Okay, So just keep that in mind as you work, and before maybe you start texturing, before you start texture painting, you may want to get that lighting set up a little bit closer to what you are going to have in the end, so that your textures, you don't have to go back in and start doing any sort of changes to those textures to match that up. So definitely something to think about as you work here in Mudbox, the on-target presentation features. Okay, so the next thing that we want to look at, we want to actually start doing some painting on this T-Rex. So we've got the lighting set up. We're going to actually start to do some painting. So the next lesson, we'll go over some of the basics of painting textures in Mudbox.